Was the Prophet of Islam lying? We must know that the deceiver resorts to lying for two reasons, either to prevent harm or to obtain a benefit. If the Prophet of Islam lie, what is the motive for this lie? Was he seeking to avoid harm, or was he looking for influence and power? Let's see. He was the Prophet of Islam before declaring himself a messenger. He lives in Mecca al-Mukarramah, a quiet and reassuring life. The people of Mecca loved him and respected him. He was known among them for his good qualities and noble qualities. They even called him honest and loyal. Therefore, there were no dangers that the Prophet of Islam feared. Rather, the opposite is what happened. He was not subjected to this amount of physical and psychological abuse throughout his life, as he was subjected to it after announcing that he was the messenger of God. Danger surrounded him from every direction, to the point of plotting to kill him in order to eliminate him at his call. This is in addition to the events that occurred with him, such as his isolation in the house of Abu Talib, and the prohibition of dealing with him or talking to him, or mixing him and those who believed in him. And they continued to persecute him until they forced him to leave Mecca. After he left behind all his money, his house, and even his daughters, he left everything and went out as an immigrant to the city. So if the Prophet of Islam lie, why sacrifice everything for a lie? The quiet and secure life he enjoyed in Mecca before the prophethood turned into a life full of dangers upon announcing his message. The stage of persecution, psychological and physical abuse, isolation, siege, and displacement from the land in which he was born and raised began. So, where is this harm from which he fled and feared, and lied to people for his sake? Or was he seeking, by saying that he was a prophet, to collect money and leadership? He answers that with his position at the beginning of his call and his decisive response to the greats of Mecca when they resorted to his uncle Abu Talib to be a mediator between them and him. They offered him that if he wanted to drive, they will make him king over all of Mecca, and if he wants money, they will accumulate it in order to become even richer than they are. His decisive response was to them by saying, "By God, if I place the sun on my right and the moon on my left, provided that I leave this matter, I will not leave it until God makes it appear, or I perish without it." The Prophet of Islam rejected the Quraysh offer. He rejected the world they brought and laid it at his feet. If he was a liar, he would have accepted bargaining with the men of Quraysh, and contented himself with abandoning his call after he had reached what he wanted, which is money and leadership, but he insisted on sticking to his position and calling for faith in God. If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, he would achieve for himself and his family a measure of wealth and luxury. After achieving what he was seeking, to spread the call of Islam inside and outside the island. But that did not happen. Rather, he forbade alms for himself and his family. If the Prophet of Islam deceiver, when he read verses from the Quran to his companions, his Lord warned him when the blind man came to him, so he turned away from him. And had it not been for these verses, his companions would not have known about this matter. If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, so why didn't he praise himself with the Quran instead of mentioning the verse that says, "He is just a messenger, he will die as the apostles died before him"? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, how could he come up with a book in which the Prophet of God Moses is mentioned 136, Jesus 25, and Abraham 69, and the name Muhammad is mentioned in his book only 4 times? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, and why did he not hasten to mention the verses that absolved his wife of the incident of slander, instead of being patient with the accusations of the hypocrites and harming them, until the revelation reached him? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, we would have found him recommending that his family inherit the prophecy after him, granting them some privileges, and producing verses from his book commanding that. If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, why did he not recommend that the caliphate be in his family and relatives? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, so why should he strive hard in worship and be patient with it until he used to pray at night, until his feet swelled? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, why did he not praise his wives and daughters in his book, as he did with Maryam bint Imran? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, he would not have left the verses for which his Lord excused him in the Quran. If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, it was a fortiori that most of the surahs speak of him, and not of Moses, God's prophet. If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, how did he predict that his uncle would live as an infidel and die as an infidel? This came in his book about Surat al-Masd, who talked about the death of his uncle on disbelief, while his uncle lived 10 years after the revelation of this surah. If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, he was taking advantage of the death of his son Abraham, and proving miracles to himself and his family. When the sun eclipsed, people said, "The sun was eclipsed by the death of the son of the Prophet of God." The Prophet rejected this saying and said, "The sun and the moon are among the signs of God, that are neither eclipsed nor eclipsed by the death of anyone." If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, what is the need to endure the various kinds of harm and persecution he has been subjected to throughout his life with those repeated attempts to kill and eliminate him? If the Prophet of Islam was a liar, has his financial and social condition improved after the prophecy? Therefore, we believe and testify that he is the messenger of God.